We've seen a major shakeup over the last few weeks in the Democratic primary for the 2028 presidential election. New polls are telling us that Kamala Harris has lost her edge as the frontrunner. According to the latest Atlas Intel poll, Pete Buttigieg has emerged as the most favored candidate among Democratic voters nationwide. He polled in at 27.7%, nearly 4 points ahead of the former vice president. This poll coming from Atlas Intel, which was one of the most accurate pollsters in both 2020 and 2024. We also have data coming in from Emerson College, another highly reputable pollster, that also shows Kamala Harris losing her lead to Pete Buttigieg. Looking at their latest poll, Buttigieg is polling in at 16%, 3 points ahead of Kamala Harris and 4 points ahead of Gavin Newsom. Meanwhile, AOC and Josh Shapiro round out the top 5. We also do have Bernie Sanders, but it's very unlikely he will make a run. And if you look at the rest of the candidates, Governor Tim Walz isn't even on the list. His political career at this point is essentially over. Now, if we were to dive deeper into this Emerson College poll, we will find significant issues for Pete Buttigieg and the Democratic Party. He might be the favorite among Democrats overall, but he certainly is not the favorite among minority voters. If you look at his spread with black voters, he pulled in at 0% support. This was an issue that was already highlighted back in 2020 when Buttigieg did very well in both Iowa and New Hampshire compared to the third and fourth races in the primary, which were, of course, Nevada and South Carolina, two states that are much less white. And Pete Buttigieg, if he is the nominee, his performance with minority voters, his poor performance with minority voters, could cost Democrats the election from the onset. And so with all of that in mind, in this video, we'll be taking a look at the potential matchup between Pete Buttigieg and JD Vance. JD Vance is by far the favorite to win the GOP nomination in 2028, and we'll be filling in this map to kind of get a gauge as to how Pete Buttigieg will be able to perform if he does end up being at the top of the Democratic ticket. And so we'll begin by filling in the solid states for the former transportation secretary. Starting off on the West Coast, he is going to easily win Washington, Oregon, and California. He will also take Hawaii, along with Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Delaware, Maryland, the District of Columbia, and the 1st District of Maine. This will give him 120 electoral votes. And of course, the solid states are ones in which either candidate are going to win by 15 percentage points or more. These are the least competitive races in the entire country. And so now moving on to the solid states for the vice president, we have Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, all of Nebraska except its 2nd district, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, South Carolina, and Alaska. This is typically what we would find the solid Republican states to be, but we will also include both Iowa and Ohio, 2 states that Trump won by double-digit margins in 2024. The shift that these 2 states have gone through over the last 3 cycles has been absolutely incredible. Just look at the map in 2012, Obama won Iowa by 6 and Ohio by 3. Just 4 years later, Trump flips both of them and wins Iowa by 9 and Ohio by 8. In 2020, Joe Biden was supposed to be a significantly stronger candidate compared to Hillary Clinton, and Trump won Iowa and Ohio by basically the same margins. But then in 2024 against Kamala Harris, Trump wins both states by double digits for the first time. And Republicans, I do believe, will be able to carry both of these races by 15 points or more in the next cycle, especially given the fact that JD Vance's home state is Ohio. He is going to have a major advantage in the Midwest. And so this will give the vice president 148 electoral votes, taking a 28 vote lead with just the solid states filled in. We're now going to move on to the likely states for both potential candidates, starting off with the likely blue states that will go in favor of Buttigieg. We'll begin with Colorado, a state that Kamala Harris carried by 11 points in 2024. This was a rather strong finish. It was still worse than Biden's 14-point margin from 2020, but much better than Clinton's 5-point margin from 2016. Colorado is a state that has generally shifted left. In fact, over the last decades, its shift towards the Democratic Party has been the most apparent out of any state on this map. We also have Illinois. This is generally not a likely blue state. In fact, Obama, Clinton, and Biden carried Illinois by the same 17-point margin in all three of the elections before 2024. Kamala Harris, though, won it by just 11. And with Buttigieg on the ballot, and given the fact that JD Vance is from Ohio, I do have Illinois as likely blue. I do realize that Buttigieg is from Indiana, but Indiana is too Republican for Buttigieg to ever stand a chance. We also have both New York and New Jersey, two additional new additions to the likely Democratic column, two states that were solid blue for a very long time. I mean, these are states that Joe Biden destroyed Trump in back in 2020. Biden won the Empire State by 23 points and the Garden State by 16. Fast forward one election cycle, Kamala Harris wins New York by just 13 and New Jersey by just 6. I mean, these have been abysmal performances, but these two states simply are not as liberal as they once were. And then we have the state of Maine as a whole. The two electoral votes from the at-large vote will go to Buttigieg, as well as Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District and Virginia. I have Buttigieg winning Virginia by just over 5 points. So these likely states will be decided by 5 to 15-point margins. They are going to be a bit more competitive than the solid states, but ultimately it is pretty clear who is going to win them. These are not the states that will actually end up deciding who the winner of the election is going to be. And so with the likely states filled in now for the former transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg sits at 207 electoral votes. And now, before we get to the likely states for Vance, something else that I wanted to highlight is the fact that people are saying that Donald Trump's policies are unpopular, and to a certain degree, that is true. If you look at polling for the big, beautiful bill, it is not true that a majority of Americans actually support it, but it is still a pretty significant chunk. And the thing for Democrats is that just because Trump and Vance are not the most popular administration in history, that does not mean that Democrats are going to win in 2026 or 2028 as a result. If you look at the favorability of the Republican Party as a whole, it currently sits at negative 10.9, 54% unfavorable, 43% favorable. That isn't the best number, but it is not too bad if you compare it to the favorability of the Democratic Party, which sits at negative 21.6, 59% unfavorable, 37% favorable. I mean, those are abysmal numbers, and it doesn't matter if Trump's policies are not winning over the majority of voters. What matters here is that the GOP remains more liked than the Democratic Party as a whole. And with JD Vance as the new nominee, he is going to perform very, very well if this national environment continues to persist. And so coming back to the map, we're going to fill in the likely red states that JD Vance will carry by 5 to 15 points. We'll start off with the two obvious ones, Texas and Florida, two states that Trump carried by double-digit margins. Texas by 14, Florida by 13. These are both states that Trump never carried by 10 points or more in any of the two previous elections that he ran in. We also have Arizona, a state that Trump did win by 5 points back in 2024. I mean, this was a very impressive victory considering the fact that Joe Biden carried Arizona just 4 years prior. He became the first Democrat to win the state since 1996. But with Trump up against Kamala Harris, it was an easy victory for the now president. We also have North Carolina. This is the only state out of these 7 battlegrounds that Trump consistently won over all 3 cycles, going back to 2016. Trump wins North Carolina by 3.7, and he continues to hold on to the Tar Heel state in both 2020 and 2024. His 2024 margin was 3.2. I do have JD Vance winning the state by just over 5 if he's running against Pete Buttigieg, who, like I said before, has absolutely no appeal with minority voters. He is not going to do well at all in the Deep South. And finally, with the addition of the 2nd District of Maine, JD Vance will sit at 246 electoral votes, just 24 away from 270. And so this means that with 8 states remaining, worth a combined 85 electoral votes, Vance needs to win just 2 to 3 of them to secure the presidency. And so we'll now move on to the lean states. These races will be very competitive, but one party will still retain a slight advantage. And so beginning with the lean states for Buttigieg, we only have the state of New Mexico. And with this victory, Buttigieg now is at 212 electoral votes, which means that he will have to win at nearly every remaining state to cross the finish line. But unfortunately for the Democrat, we do have quite a few lean states for the vice president. We're going to begin out west in Nevada. This is a state that Republicans won in 2024 for the first time in 20 years. George W. Bush was the last Republican to win the Silver State before Trump. From 2008 until 2020, the state was won by Democrats in every single election, but the margin had been decreasing since Obama left office, and Trump's 3.1% victory, along with Joe Lombardo's victory in the gubernatorial election back in 2022, really shows just how much the state has shifted towards the GOP over the last few years. Nevada is going to be lean Republican. I don't see anything about Pete Buttigieg that would suggest that he would be able to win the state back. We also have up in the Midwest, Wisconsin. Generally, this has been the most conservative of the 3 former blue wall states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But in 2024, the surprising thing was that Trump won Michigan and Pennsylvania by a larger margin than he won Wisconsin. But in the next election, I do expect Vance to perform better in Wisconsin than Michigan. Generally speaking, Wisconsin still is more conservative than its 2 eastern neighbors. Vance will also win in Pennsylvania. This was the state that got both Biden and Trump over 270 electoral votes in the last 2 cycles, and I will give it to the vice president. JD Vance now crossing the magic number of 270. He is now at 281 electoral votes after winning a state that Trump carried by 1.7 against Kamala Harris. And then moving on down south to Georgia, 16 electoral votes, a state that Joe Biden carried in 2020, but this was the only time Democrats won the state going all the way back to 1992. Donald Trump easily won it back in 2024, defeating Harris here by 2.2%. Considering that Pete Buttigieg does have a major issue with colored voters, is no doubt Vance will continue the Republicans' stranglehold on the Peach State. The margin will be smaller than what we'll see in North Carolina, but it will be a victory nonetheless. With all of the solid, likely, and lean states filled in, JD Vance has already crossed 270. He is now at 297 electoral votes to Pete Buttigieg's 212. And so we're now left with just 3 races that are all going to be put into the tilt category. These races will be decided by margins of less than 1%. They're basically pure toss-ups. They're the most competitive races in the entire country. And this says a lot about how the map shifted after 2024. I mean, look at the 3 states remaining. Minnesota and New Hampshire are 2 of them. These states were not even thought to be remotely competitive just a few months ago. They were believed to be well within the Democratic column, but now we're seeing states like North Carolina and Arizona easily go towards the GOP. Democrats have to choose a better candidate. Pete Buttigieg right now does not look like he is going to be the one, nor does it look like Kamala Harris or AOC are going to be the one to beat Vance in 2028. They still have a lot of time to keep looking, but so far they haven't found their guy. And so starting off in Minnesota, Pete Buttigieg, he is going to win the state's 10 electoral votes. Tim Walz on the ticket with Kamala Harris didn't really do much for them in 2024. Democrats won by just 4%. This was a strong performance from President Trump, who only lost by a lean margin. Now, in 2016, Hillary Clinton won by 1.5%. Minnesota has been close for the last few cycles, but with these Democratic victories, it remains the state with the longest continuous Democratic voting streak in presidential elections. Now, that streak isn't going to hold for much longer, but in 2028, I do see Buttigieg slightly edging out Vance. And finally, we're left with Michigan and New Hampshire. I'm going to give Michigan to JD Vance. I have him winning by just under 1%, basically the same margin that Trump won it by against Kamala Harris. And then up in New Hampshire, no Republican has won this state in over 2 decades, but JD Vance could win a state that Trump never won in his 3 presidential cycles. I do have the vice president flipping New Hampshire, winning its 4 electoral votes. It was the state that Kamala Harris won by the narrowest margin in 2024, defeating Trump here by just 2.8%. It was also a state that Trump came very close to winning in 2016, losing out to Clinton by just 0.37. New Hampshire definitely has what it takes to flip. And so JD Vance, I have at now 316 electoral votes with that additional victory. And so if JD Vance and Pete Buttigieg were to be their respective parties' nominees, I have the vice president defeating the former transportation secretary 316 to 222. This would be the worst performance for any Democratic candidate since Michael Dukakis in 1988. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like this video down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below who you think would win between Buttigieg and Vance and who you wanted the Democratic and Republican nominees to be. And make sure you subscribe right now for more content just like this leading up to the 2026 midterms and the 2028 election.